In a land of deserts, the valley has the most important resource of all, water. A combination of the availability of water and the flat floor of the valley has made this region a crossroads of major civilizations for thousands. Reflecting this long history is the site of Pella in the foothills in the north of the valley. From a distance, the main mound of Pella looks like any ordinary hill. But as you get closer, it becomes clear that the mound is a storehouse of human history. The water of Wadi Jirim has ensured a continuous occupation at Pella spanning thousands of years. Hundreds of generations have lived here, each adding a little to the history of the site. One period on top of the other has slowly built up an artificial mound, known in the Middle East as a tell. In places, the tell is 15 meters deep, 15 meters of accumulated human debris. From humble beginnings, Pella grew to be an important city. This tell has seen Egyptians, Israelites, Romans, Greeks, pagans, Christians and Muslims, as change after change has swept the region.
Well-watered site, it's got a lot of arable land, it stands at the head of two major trade routes, so throughout the historic past, and very likely in the prehistoric past as well, it's been a site that's strategically important, as well as a site that occupies one of the more favourable environmental needs.
Although there are glimpses of earlier periods, what we do know is that Pella was first occupied over 8,000 years ago in the Neolithic period, when a small agricultural village was built above the spring on a low hill. With time, the village grew to be a considerable city. The length of occupation at Pella has caused the tell to resemble a giant layer cake, with one level on top of the other. Close by the tell are other important areas. At the head of the spring stand the massive building programs of the Romans and the Byzantines, who ruled Pella in the years following the birth of Christ. The Romans built a small theatre and diverted the waters of the spring into a bathhouse. The Byzantines crowned this with a magnificent Christian cathedral. It was during the Byzantine period, some 1,500 years ago, that Pella reached its peak. On hills overlooking the site, the Byzantines constructed more churches, and Pella became a major religious centre for the region. On top of the neighbouring hill of Tel Husn, further evidence of the vast sweep of history at Pella has come to light. In the lower levels of the excavations, massive constructions, earlier than the building of the Great Pyramids of Egypt, have been discovered. At higher levels, the Byzantines used this area as a fortress, probably to stable a cavalry unit. To the north of the main tell lie the clues for the latest chapter in Pella's history. After the disastrous earthquake of 747 AD, the city was rebuilt and was governed by a succession of Islamic dynasties. Shops and inns were erected, and the new city became the focus for passing traders. Over time, however, trade routes shifted and other cities rose to prominence, and Pella dwindled. For the past few hundred years, the city of Pella has slowly fallen into ruin. The only settlement on the site, now being the village of طبقة, to go far to find a thriving town that only a few years ago was a cluster of a dozen houses. This is the town of Masharia, on the floor of the valley, below the village of طبقة, refugees, and became a service centre for the...
In the end, however, why is it that we travel halfway around the world to dig up history in another people's land? Of course, there's many reasons for this. It's a shared history, just as important to the Jordanians as it is to us. Secondly, the changes that we detect in archaeology help us understand the changes that are sweeping our world today, both here in Masharia and back home. Thirdly, a common thread that binds it all together is an interest in humanity. How people lived in the past is just as important as how people live today. And it's through friends such as these people here that help us understand more about the past as well as the problems of the present, and help make what could be a fairly dull subject come alive.
Against this backdrop, the Australian archaeologists return each spring to Pella to continue their work of discovery on the Tell. House. Built in 1979, questions remain from the previous years and new ones will arise as the work progresses. The months ahead will be very demanding for the team.
You get up about 5:45 or so and you have a cup of tea, and the workmen arrive at about 6ish and pick up all the tools. Abuisa checks them off, and they're usually in the trench at about 5:15 to 6:30 and reasonably awake and things are happening. You get the most achieved in that time. And then breakfast is about 9 to 9:30. So you're back here and you're working until about 2. And that's the really hot time of the day. It's the really slow time of the day when you don't get very much done. So that's sort of the other end of the day.
This season will be devoted to excavating deposits which will increase our understanding of the early periods at Pella. Those periods which saw human society change once again from that of the village farmer, seen at Wadi Hamar, to an urban dweller who lived in walled cities of considerable size. Towards this aim, the archaeologist might be excavating either in a large trench or in a similar construction. Throughout it all, the archaeologist must keep track of all aspects of their area. A task made more difficult by the fact that many of the local workers speak only Arabic.
Some of the men are new and some are old hands. Ultimately, I think that, yes, the men do know what we're about, what we're after. They do ask questions, and I try to relate to them as well as I can in broken Arabic what's going on. As to getting men to work, I think that that's a universal phenomenon that no one really likes to work too hard, and you do have to find a really difficult balance between pushing your men on and making them work, because we are here for a limited amount of time on a certain budget, but still keeping a good feeling within the.
At any one time during the season at Pella, up to 10 trenches and sondages were in operation, each with its own agenda, but all part of the overall strategy for the season. To obtain the maximum amount of information, the trenches were scattered across the Tell and surrounding areas. Beyond the spring of Wadi Jirim rise the steep sides of Tell Husn, or Mound of the Fortress. On this easily defensible natural hill, the inhabitants of Pella have had a secure base in times of trouble. And the path to the top remains long and steep. Archaeologists can the science of working out how each different layer relates to the level, the more recent the date. To obtain information from the lower levels, the higher levels must be removed first. Some say that archaeology is a bit like reading a book backwards and tearing out the pages as you go. Archaeology, by its very nature, is destructive. Take many precautions to ensure that a high degree of information is retained, long after a particular deposit may have disappeared, which chronicles the work day by day in a. From the field, all objects and samples are taken to the dig house for processing. These objects may be made from pottery or from glass, stone, alabaster, bone, or any number of materials. So tiny as a seed, an elaborate process is used. The soil being sampled for possible seeds is first collected in the trench and placed in bags. These are then loaded aboard the dig's vehicle and taken to the spring for a process known as flotation.
It's a great detective piece of trial and error, and that's the fascinating thing about it.
There is a saying that goes, those who live in the past forfeit the present, but those who forget the past forfeit the future. After all, from the perspective of a future generation, today is the past. Just imagine how people will view our world, not in 50 years' time, but in 10,000 years' time. Some people say that because of film and other archival, there is no doubt about this. It is the habit of all people to see their own time as somehow superior to previous generations. It now seems impossible for another dark age to sweep the world. But a Roman from the time of Christ would have also thought the same thing. Time will make fools of us all. Who knows what the future has in store? But an understanding of history makes it all a little less bewildering. So what will the archaeologists of tomorrow make of today's Tabakat file? As they excavate the houses of this town, what will they learn? In time, because of the landscape, the people and their cultures, and for the love of knowledge, the Australian team will return each spring to Pella to continue their work. The periods of interest may change and new trenches may be opened, but the excavation will continue. As it does, further missing links will be found, and our knowledge of this ancient provincial town will increase. With this information, the Jordanians will have another chapter added to their already extensive history, and we, as foreigners, will have a window through which to view our own heritage. From the field, all objects and samples are taken to the dig house for processing. These objects may be made...
And it's like an intensive course in all aspects of archaeology, practical aspects, intellectual aspects. There's a constant discussion with other students and your peers as to current debates going on.
But an understanding of history makes it all a little less bewildering. So what will the archaeologists of tomorrow make of today's Tabakat file? As they excavate the houses of this town, what will they learn?